Welcome everyone to the September meeting of the House Bill 737 PFAS Commission. For the record, my name is Representative Rosemary Rung from the town of Merrimack. I chair the commission, and so I'm going to be calling the meeting to order at 10:01 a.m. on September 9th. All of you should have received the July minutes. As you know, we didn't meet in August. So I'd be happy to entertain a motion to accept those minutes. Is there a motion?
Moved.
Motion made by Mr. Dunn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Murphy. Are there any corrections or additions, edits to the minutes? No, all set. I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes as submitted, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you very much. By the way, I really want to thank Mr. Dunn for, he's going to be our minute taker today. So thank you very much. And I also, I wasn't able to do it at our last meeting because he wasn't able to join us, but I do want to welcome Don Preventure from Merrimack. He's our second environmental advocate scientist to join us, and he's so knowledgeable about this issue from his role on the MVD Commission. So welcome very much, Don, and thank you very much for serving. I'd like to move on to, we're going to flip it around. I seem to always have the alphabetical order for DES update, but today we're going to start with DHHS. So Dr. Bush, do you have an update for us?
Hi, everyone. So a few updates to share. And Rosemary, Representative Rung, I did want to make sure that you saw the email I sent yesterday. I know as we get ready for—
I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to reply, but yes, I did get it.
That's okay. Getting ready for our interim report, I wasn't quite sure how to distill down all the DHHS updates from the last year. So I did my best in that email and attachment to just, if there's a section in the report, to just kind of recap, you know, major updates from either DHHS or DES or some of our federal partners. I tried to highlight those most salient points. So that's what that email was about. And then in terms of specific updates, I can share an update regarding the Merrimack cancer investigation, just to say that that final report that sort of looks at phase 1 of the data analysis and really summarizing the kidney and renal cancers that we shared about much earlier in the year is sort of in the final stages of review. And so the draft report sharing the results of additional data and the decision making to sort of move forward into next steps of a study will be shared very soon. And I think we could start to think about inviting the cancer program to a future meeting to share that report and connect with the commission on that. So if we have an October date already for a meeting, I could circulate that and check on availability. And I think we could move forward with planning on that. Oops, sorry, I'm getting pinged from who knows where. Another update is just to let folks know our Choose Safe Places program has been working closely with partners in DES to sample water quality across child care providers across the whole state. And so that work is ongoing. We launched that over the summer. We just recently distributed, I can get some hard copies to share with folks, but this New Hampshire Choose Safe Places private well water testing toolkit that went out to all child care providers served by a private well. So it's this really beautifully formatted 20-page resource for child care providers. As part of that, we are offering free PFAS testing, also lead testing, and a standard analysis plus radon in water. So quite a comprehensive suite of water contaminants. And so those results are starting to come in. We have not seen any PFAS exceedances in any of the facilities we've sampled to date. A few detections here and there. And for everyone who's been following, this does tie into, oh, Mike, you could help me. Is it 1502? One of the bills that was ongoing, kind of under discussion, to sample all schools and childcare facilities for PFAS. And rather than pursue that bill, DES took on the work of sampling all of those facilities. So this work is tied to that. And our program is really focused on reaching those childcare facilities served by private well. And so we'll continue to do outreach to facilities to try to increase our recruitment and participation throughout the fall. And we're hoping that the dissemination of the toolkit will encourage participation. So far, I think we have about a 20% response rate. So we're hoping to hear from more providers in the fall as everyone sort of gets back into their normal routines. So that was our Choose Safe Places project. And otherwise, I would just like to let folks know that, you know, after many months of hearing from you all and other concerned parties and working with Peg DiTullio at the Nurse Practitioner Conference, we are taking on a project to start drafting a New Hampshire specific PFAS fact sheet aimed at healthcare providers. So that is something that we're working on, and I'll look forward to sharing that with all of you as it's in development. So it's in its very early stages, you know, really looking at some of the work coming out of the National Academy's most recent report, as well as updates that ATSDR has been making over the last year to their outreach materials. But just recognizing there's enough sort of specific to New Hampshire and our drinking water standards and our communities of concern that it's worth highlighting in a New Hampshire specific document. So we are undertaking that project currently, and we'll be happy to share updates at a future meeting. I think that's all I have for now. Everything else that I included in that email was really, you know, previously shared. Are there any questions or comments?
Are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Allen.
Two. One is when you do that fact sheet, will you be open to seeking some input from communities before you finalize it?
Yeah, I think particularly, I mean, yes, we're always open to input. I think where we will especially want feedback is how to then get this out into the hands of people who can use it. And I think to help ensure that it answers the questions that residents have of their healthcare providers. So yeah. We'll certainly welcome.
In the commission, maybe can give input. The other question is, when you're sampling the childcare facilities, are you looking at all state license, including home-based?
Yes, we are. Yep. So all state licensed facilities. Yep. Center-based and home-based facilities.
Dr. Woods.
Has there been any resistance at all, especially in the private sector, to be subject to the testing?
Well, you know, it's always tricky. We don't know when people don't participate, we don't hear from them. So we don't know why they don't participate. But certainly, you know, in general, I think we can think about cost, awareness, convenience as all potential barriers to water testing, whether we're talking about private homeowners or childcare providers. So I expect that some of those things are barriers here, whether they're aware of the potential risks, whether they are worried about costs of fixing the problem, you know, and just having the time. I think childcare sector in general is generally pretty straight out. So just having the time. We have tried really hard to streamline this process and make it as, well, it's free. We've also leveraged ARPA dollars in many cases to actually support treatment. So we've really tried to remove the convenience barrier by doing the testing and bringing it to the lab, paying for it, and hopefully providing funds for treatment. So we've tried to eliminate those barriers. But I think, yes, I think there is still, those are still real barriers out there, whether a lack of awareness, lack of time, or lack of funds to support testing or treatment. But in many cases, this is required testing as part of their licensing. And currently, you know, all facilities need to test for lead once every 3 years or so. So we've really tried to dovetail it with some of the required testing and just increased the number of analytes that we're testing for as part of this project. So I think that has helped make it more appealing as not just something extra we're asking of them, but really helping them do something they need to do anyways. So I think it's more about getting it in front of them and then connecting with those who are interested to make sure we do schedule our sampling date. And so, like I said, we're hoping with the fall and kind of back to routines and the dissemination of the toolkit that we'll see some higher numbers of participation.
Ms. Murphy?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if on those daycare centers, I know you said that most, I guess, didn't have any PFAS, but the ones that do, I'm wondering if they're maybe below the New Hampshire MCLs, but over the EPA advisory, are they going to be told that that water is considered unsafe by the EPA?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nancy. And we are just currently putting together those reports that will go out. So it can take 4 to 5 weeks for sample results to come back. So that's a great thought. We actually haven't finalized the language of those letters. And I think in many places where we have, you know, guidance, so thinking about radon in water where there's not a specific MCL or action level, same now with the EPA health advisories, I think we can think about how to bring that language into the letter. These are the ones clearly above an MCL, a standard, you know, an enforceable standard versus above a health effect. So we'll certainly consider that as we're drafting the letters.
Yeah, I
Dr.
would think
Creasy?
that's really important. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a clarifying question about the childcare testing. Is this literally all in the state or just ones that are on well water or ones on city water exempted?
Yeah, so we prioritized those served by a private well as those we consider most at risk, because the ones served by a private or public water system are subject to all of the drinking water standards. So we very much feel like those are taken care of and monitored. These ones, you know, have a higher likelihood of perhaps falling through the cracks. So there are drinking water standards or testing requirements as part of childcare licensing, but it's not a complete list of analytes. So this is meant to like sort of increase the number of analytes we're looking for and help. Yeah, we just thought as a pilot project to really try to target those we consider maybe most at risk for some of these drinking water contaminants like arsenic, uranium, manganese, and PFAS.
Yeah, thanks.
Is Alan?
I'm just thinking it might be helpful, and maybe you've thought of this already, to include, you know, we did work collaboratively a couple of years ago with DES, DHHS, and Dartmouth to do a PFAS information sheet, right? So if they receive that, you know, that may be helpful because they may not realize what this is. There are still people out there who they know a little bit about it, but they just say, I can't deal with this. I have all these kids to watch today or something like that. And the other is if you included some information about the state rebate program, which might get beyond that barrier of, oh no, if we test and find it, then what? You know, life is expensive and childcare providers are not rolling in the big bucks. They're doing a great service to many families. So if we provide those resources, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's a great idea to include that in the results letter. I hadn't thought of that. It is in our toolkit. So right here is all the funding available, and there's a link right to the PFAS rebate program. So that is very much in there, as well as the PFAS treatment design services, because some of the facilities, if they're center-based, for example, may be eligible for the design funding. So yes, great idea to include some of this in the letter themselves. I hadn't thought of including the fact sheets for, you know, contaminants in exceedance. So letters to include fact sheet.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Bush?
Thank you for these suggestions.
Okay, I have a couple, Dr. Bush. One is with the PFAS testing in that water, are you just looking at the 4 regulated PFAS in New Hampshire, or are you able to screen for others like
It's
PFBA?
in my list. I don't know that off the top of my head. We generally do a more complete panel. No, we are 25 compounds, I think, may be included. And Mike, I don't know if you can speak to this at all. It's the same lab and contract that, you know, the MTBE Bureau and others are using. We're using the same laboratory that DES has used. This is a real partnership. So DES is actually overseeing the PFAS component of the sampling. So it's whatever kind of has become the standard for PFAS well water testing at this point.
Yeah, I think that's right, Katie. And typically labs are doing somewhere on the order. There are different test panels that you can order, but basically 25 is kind of a basic approach. You know, as Amy's saying here, it's either 25 or 29 actually. And you know, actually, if you want to just get the 4, you almost have to like order it specially. It's kind of a standard analysis.
Oh, okay, thank you. And one other question, Dr. Bush, with the lead testing, one of the issues I think we've seen with the testing that DES has done, I forget the bill as a result of the bill, but in Merrimack anyway, we found that some of our schools had higher lead than what the standard is, and it wasn't from the municipal water, it was actually from the fixtures in the building. So even though I know you're prioritizing well water centers, and I totally agree with that, but I was just wondering if there's any outreach, or if you do get to those centers that are on municipal water, just understand that they could still have a significant lead issue if it's an older
Oh,
building that's got older
absolutely.
fixtures.
Absolutely. And the Get the Lead Out of Water program being run out of DES, that bill, it does legislatively mandate testing at all schools and daycares,
Okay.
those served by public or private water, and testing all fixtures. So any point at which people may consume the water. So including, kitchen sinks, bathroom sinks, classroom sinks, and drinking water fountains. So that is ongoing, separate from our Choose Safe Places program. We've sort of dovetailed in the instances where the facilities are eligible for both, but they are very much working very hard to get all of those samples from, I forget, Leanne Atwell from the program could tell you, how many fixtures they're sampling statewide, probably hundreds of thousands of fixtures. And that's very right, that it's not coming from the source per se, it's very much a contaminant that's introduced in the distribution system and sometimes right at the tap. So,
Yeah.
Yep.
No,
so
I
thanks for that
think,
clarification. Yep.
no, thanks. And it might be, I'll at least get the message to Mr. Preventure that maybe in some future MVD communication, just mention that, MVD water is well below the maximum standard for lead, but you could be introducing lead through your fixtures and how they can test for that. I think that's important. I was really shocked at the levels of lead in some of the Merrimack schools. This was, I think, back in a 2016, 2018 test. But people, I think, have this, sense of security that as long as the municipal water is okay, they're okay, not realizing that contaminants can be introduced through their systems. So, okay, thank you. Any other? Oh, yes, Mr. Preventure.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. You're right. I know you had sent me those results in the past about the elevated lead in the schools. And you're right, MVD does, I don't know if you're aware, but we do raise the pH, and we also inject an orthophosphate, and those two things are done to do as best we can to try to prevent the water from being corrosive, to leach out any of the lead. But obviously, if there are lead in fixtures or solder in pipes and things like that, there's really not much more we can do. So it would have to be done at a site-specific level to mitigate those issues. So just want to make sure everybody understands that it's a site-specific concern in many places, actually. So
All right.
that's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so we'll move on to the DES update. Mr. Wimsatt, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. So I have a pretty full update. Lots happened over the last couple of months. So we'll start with the Air Division's update, and this was provided to me by Kathy Beam. So with regard to permitting activities and inspections, I gave an update on that at the July meeting, and there hasn't been any new information or updates regarding that. But we do have an update regarding stack testing activities. So stack testing took place as required under the facilities permit on August 24th and 25th, just a couple weeks ago. And DES had 2 experienced staff members present to observe the method in which the samples were collected and the operation of the towers at the facility during the stack test. The RTO, the regenerative thermal oxidizer, did not encounter any issues, and the stack test was completed as designed. DES expects a stack test report to be submitted within 60 days after the completion of the testing as required under the permit and the rules. With regard to bypass operations, I know there's a lot of interest in that. So just as kind of a summary, during the first 8 months of operation from July of 21 to April of 22, when the RTO was in its initial shakedown period, Saint-Gobain reported 45 hours of bypass total. And during the April to June period, the 3 months following that, they reported an additional 6 hours of bypass, for a total of 51 hours in bypass since the RTO was started up. The following information pertaining to the fan failure that occurred in July was provided to the environmental subcommittee by me at their meeting on September 1st, but I thought it would be helpful to provide it here as well for the benefit of the whole commission. So I'm just going to read to you a kind of a pretty detailed narrative of what happened and how that, what happened when and how it was dealt with. So the RTO's fan shut down unexpectedly at approximately 10:29 a.m. on July 25th. And at the time, the MS and the QX towers, those are 2 production towers, were mid-production run. And so pursuant to Saint-Gobain's air pollution control equipment monitoring plan and taking into account the health and safety protocols at the plant, Saint-Gobain proceeded as quickly as possible to ensure a safe shutdown of the facility. Production runs were completed by 11 a.m. on the MS tower and by 2:29 p.m. on the QX tower. So subsequently, all production at the facility was shut down. So during the approximate 4-hour duration needed to bring production to a safe stop, the RTO bypass stack was enabled. Saint-Gobain informed the department of this event via a telephone call on July 25th and via a letter on August 1st, or dated August 1st. On July 29th, the company notified DES that an additional bypass occurred. After making the repairs to the fan blower, the RTO was restarted around 3:30 p.m. on July 28th. The unit ran successfully until around 10:19 a.m. on July 29th when the fan failed again. So essentially less than a day, less than 24 hours before the second failure. All production came to a safe stop around 1:30 p.m. on that date. Coating operations remained stopped until a new replacement fan was installed. Saint-Gobain informed the department of this event via an email on July 29th and via a letter dated August 8th. During the weekend of August 5th through 7th, the replacement fan was delivered to the facility and installed on the RTO. The RTO was brought back online and up to temperature before production started on August 8th of 2022. So in addition, Saint-Gobain has reported a 2-hour period on August 18th, during which the RTO average hourly temperature was below 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit. And another instance on September 6th, during which the bypass damper opened for a total of 12 minutes while the facility was optimizing the RTO. The RTO main fan remained on, combustion chamber temperature remained above the hourly average temperature of 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit, and the emissions continued to be routed to the RTO. A full report is due September 19th and will be posted to One Stop at that time. I know that's a lot of detail, and everything I've just read to you will be included in what I provide to Mr. Dunn, so it'll be included in the minutes, and it will have, as we always try to do, hot links to the various documents that I've referred to. So if you have, if you want to delve into that a little further, once you get the minutes, it'll be, much easier to do that. So continuing with the Air Division's update, the Saint-Gobain has continued to submit rainwater study results as required in the consent decree. And those documents can be found at a link that will be provided under the General Correspondence tab on our website. The most recent rainwater study letter is dated August 5th and reflects samples taken in June. Results indicate measurements were below detection levels for almost all PFAS analytes. For a few analytes, there were some values that were estimated between the detection and reporting levels and given what's called a J flag qualifier. These J qualified results were as follows, and I'm not going to read them because it's a long list of numbers. Basically, for the Concord, Merrimack, and Nashua samples, there were detections in the sub 1 part per billion, 1 part per trillion range. So in fractions of 1 part per trillion for PFBS, PFHPA, PFOA, PFHXA, and PFPEA. And then there were a couple of data points for Merrimack and Nashua that were above 1 part per trillion for PFOS. And there's I won't read it to you because it's really, it's pretty detailed, technical, but I'll include in the notes. There was a note on the laboratory report that suggested they had a problem with the method blank where they did detect PFOS in the method blank, which of course you shouldn't do. And that called into question those results. So there's a note that talks about how that was attempted to be reconciled. There were reasons of what happened with the lab result, the lab work for that particular sample that meant they really couldn't determine with confidence whether those results in Nashua and Merrimack were real or not. So that's unsatisfying, but that's what it says. And I'll save you the very technical jargon. I won't read that into the record here, but it'll be included in detail in the notes that I submit to Mr. Dunn. So that's the Air Division's update, and I'm happy to take any questions on that before I go on to the Waste Division.
Yes, Miss Allen.
Have they, those are the reports that they've done. Have they done the stormwater testing?
No, I'll be talking about that in a moment, but that still has not happened.
I'm jumping. Okay, and just to get another piece out there that's probably, I don't know what it's related to in the investigation of Saint-Gobain, but I'm hearing from some residents in the last month from Horseshoe Pond area, and I just want to pass that on to you, that they're concerned with seeing a lot of swimming, pets in the water, fishing, and they're concerned that their water isn't posted, and they're asking about, you know, testing and fish testing and stuff. So I've been hearing that from several people, and I've given them DES's contact information, but I think people sometimes get frustrated and say, well, they're not going to do anything. So I said, well, I will pass it on, you know, and let you know. So Horseshoe Pond in particular has some concerns.
Okay, I thank you. I'll look into that.
All right, thanks.
Okay,
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Wimsatt.
So the Waste Division's update, follow the usual format that I use. So and again, this will be submitted with the my notes along with hot links to the various documents that I'm going to refer to. On June 29th, DES received a work plan for the installation of point of entry treatment of POET systems at the properties identified in the June 23rd agreement. DES reviewed and approved the work plan with stipulations in a letter dated August 22nd. DES has a meeting scheduled with Saint-Gobain on September 13th, so that's I believe this Tuesday, to discuss the DES comments, and is anticipating a response from Saint-Gobain by September 15th. The company sent out a request for proposal in July and received bids for POET contractors in August. They're working to select their contractor and anticipate beginning POET installations in October. They've indicated that they believe all the POETs can be installed by the end of July of 2023. So the idea is that that work will continue across several towns beginning next month, and then should be completed by the summer of 23. On July 12th, DES received a remedial action implementation report that documented the provision of alternate water for each property described in the 2018 consent decree. So that's a report we've been waiting for some time. It really just goes back to the work that was really done as far back as 2017 and into 18 and 19 to connect people to public water as a result of these are the properties that were identified in the original 2018 consent decree. So we certainly know about that, and those people are already connected, but we didn't have a final report that described and summarized that work. So we do have that in hand now, and we're in the process of reviewing that report, and we'll provide comment as needed. On August 11th, Saint-Gobain mailed out letters to 375 properties identified for alternate water in the June 23rd agreement with DES. These letters were sent out to properties that are bottled water eligible and cleared by the Saint-Gobain's legal department. On September 2nd, Saint-Gobain mailed out 35 letters notifying property owners listed in the agreement of proposed connections to municipal water. These letters pertain to properties that are proposed for connection to Manchester Waterworks in the Merrimack Village District. So those are typically the folks who are mostly folks who are not in Londonderry. So separate and apart, letters were not mailed for properties listed as being evaluated for potential water line extensions in parts of Londonderry. The water provider, which is primarily Pennachuck there, is currently evaluating the feasibility of these water line extensions. And if the existing infrastructure has the capacity to supply water to these areas, Saint-Gobain will make a determination if water line extensions are feasible to this area by this fall, and letters to residents are expected after the determination is made. So the expectation is, as anticipated by the agreement, Pennachuck is evaluating the feasibility of extending water in those areas that were identified for such in the consent agreement. And then they'll report back to Saint-Gobain, and then we should hear from them this fall. And then letters will go out to those residents to confirm that they've been identified for connection to a water system. So the idea is that that would basically design would happen over this winter. Projects would go out to bid early in 23, and then the construction, beginning construction of those water lines and connection of folks in 23. On August 17th, DES met with Saint-Gobain to discuss the application for a groundwater management permit and groundwater management zone. It was determined that Saint-Gobain would not be able to submit the application for groundwater management permit by the due date of August 26th. So we'll be meeting with them on October 4th to discuss further sampling and the application for the groundwater management permit. There are a number of details that we felt that they were not prepared to give us an application that we could approve. And so we're meeting to iron out those details with the expectation that they would then get us an application for a permit that would be approvable. On the issue of bottled water, DES has been meeting bi-weekly with Saint-Gobain on a number of issues. And as part of those discussions, we've discussed measures to address the ongoing issues pertaining to delays in bottled water deliveries to residents. This is an ongoing problem. Saint-Gobain has informed DES that it finalized a contract with an additional vendor this week, or the week of August 22nd. The new vendor is set to take on water delivery to 231 homes in Londonderry, in the Londonderry area of the site. Notifications to property owners will be mailed out the week of September 6th, so that's this week. And the removal of these homes from the current water delivery contractor, Monadnock Springs, should alleviate some of the strain on their backlog and allow them to kind of catch up and maintain a more regular delivery schedule to the customers that they retain. So, you know, this has been a concern, and this has been a struggle for Monadnock. They had to really grow their delivery business going back to 2016. They're suffering the same, they don't have a supply chain problem in the water. They can produce the water fine, but they've struggled with, you know, truck drivers and employees and keeping the employees in the trucks running to get those deliveries done on time. That's been a continuing concern. So we're encouraged that, you know, we're hoping that bringing on this second contractor, particularly, I think just geographically, it's easier for Monadnock to do deliveries closer to where they're headquartered. So the Bedford, Merrimack, Litchfield, or not mainly Litchfield, but Bedford, Merrimack deliveries. And then so they tried to skew the assignment of properties to the new contractor to Londonderry, which is a little bit further afield from their plan. And we're hoping that that will help alleviate this. And I think the expectation is that they wanted to try with this initial slug of 230 properties, but if possible, they would, you know, potentially convert additional properties over to service by this new vendor in hopes that both vendors could provide timely service and delivery until all these folks get their permanent water solutions. And that brings us to the water supply sampling summary. So Saint-Gobain presented a work plan for residential well sampling and 15 addenda. We're up to 15 addenda now. As of August 19th, there are 3,801 properties that have been identified for sampling, and that's 110 more than I reported in July. 3,790 access agreements have been sent, and they're getting a return rate of around 69%, which is a little bit of a bump up from what they've had before. And that's 110 more than the July report. And then 2,341 samples have been collected from water supply wells. That's 65 more than the July report. And to date, 1,007 properties have been offered bottled water, and that's 16 more than the July report. So with regard to site investigation, Saint-Gobain's consultant will be conducting the post-RTO stormwater sampling, timing dependent on weather conditions that meet the requirements of the approved work plan. The recent storms were not sampled due to uncertainty with scheduling and potential safety issues related to lightning. So it's always a little bit frustrating. This is not the first site where we've wanted, you know, stormwater sampling to occur, and it is often a struggle. You'd think that with all the thunderstorms and such that you might get in a typical summer that you could get that, but the problem is the thunderstorm is not a particularly good candidate for stormwater sampling because they tend to be very sudden and happen, so you don't have time to plan for them, and they happen, and the rainfall happens very quickly. And it's also dangerous to be out sampling in lightning, so it doesn't really work out as a good sampling effort or opportunity. The more recent sustained rain that we got would have been terrific, but it was not really forecasted particularly early, and it didn't really allow for Saint-Gobain to be ready to go and do that. So they still have not done that sampling. Typically, and we hope for lots of reasons, that we have a typical fall where we tend to have some what they call the fall rains, and those are typically the kind of rains that are good for a stormwater sampling event. So it's our hope that in the coming weeks they'll get that sampling event in, but it has not yet occurred. So it's important for a lot of reasons. One is that we want the data, but also the submittal of a remedial action plan for the site proper is due 120 days after that sampling analytical results from the stormwater sampling event are received. So it's kind of, the event is tied to some other deliverables that we're looking forward to getting. So we'll hope that that happens in the next several weeks. And then, as I said, the groundwater management permit application was due by August 26th, but we've got a meeting to kind of reconcile some problems with that in early October, and we would hope to see that soon thereafter. So I think that's going to do it. I think we've got a lot of business here, and I've taken up probably enough time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Dunn.
Question, Mike. Is there any update on when everybody should receive a letter in Londonderry about the POET system? Because many residents have not received letters yet, and I know you just said a bunch still to go out, but is there like a deadline or any way they could check and see if they should have received a letter or not yet?
Yeah, here's my understanding. My understanding is that people who are definitely in line for a POET system have received letters. There may be a handful of people where, and it could be as many as 30 or 40, I think, where the company, when they made their first proposal, we asked them to look at the possibility that some of those that were proposed for POETs might actually be better candidates for a water line connection. So I think they're still, as part of the work that Pennachuck is doing at the request of Saint-Gobain, they're evaluating those particular homes. So those homes probably would not have gotten a letter yet. But yeah, my expectation is that Pennachuck, I think, is close to finishing their analytical work on this, and that, or their analysis of this, and that this fall, those questions would be answered, and then those letters would go out. I don't know exactly, but so I would expect that if there are people who, at the end of the day, are really going to get a POET system based on that analysis, that they would get their letter kind of at the same time as the other folks who are going to be identified for a water line get their letters.
Is there anywhere that I could check or they could check to see? Because I can tell you that no one on my street's got a letter yet. And we were all scheduled for POETs, and there's not a public water supply near us. Okay,
here's what I would recommend you reach out, and I'll mention it to Andy, that you reach out directly to Andy Fuller, our project manager for this. And I think he can help. If he doesn't know the answer to that, he'll run it to ground and he'll get you the answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mr. Wimsatt? Yes, Ms. Murphy.
Oh, thank you. Two questions. Actually, one of the ones, the same one that I had for Dr. Bush. Mike, is when the testing is done on properties, now that we have that EPA information, are homeowners being informed that even though the in those incidents where their wells may be testing below the MCLs but above the EPA, are they being informed that even though they're not technically exceeding our MCLs, the EPA has stated that they are unsafe?
Yes, so what we do with the sampling that we're doing in the properties around the consent decree area, we have a standard letter that goes out, and then telling them what their results are. And then there's a document attached to that letter called a water testing summary. And it goes out to everybody that we test. And it's got a lot of information. It includes a summary of everything that was tested for, how it compares to various standards and goals. And one of the columns in that table is identified as a health goal, essentially. And there's a comment or a note about what that is on the summary that identifies the June 15th announcement that EPA made about these interim health advisories, and letting them know, and giving them some reference materials to go to an EPA document that explains what that means.
Thank you. Hey, one more question.
Yep.
Do you have, Mike, do you know offhand, or can you get us the number of houses outside the consent decree area that are attributable at this point to St. Gobain?
So that's a loaded question, because that would call on us to take a look at every single data point and make a decision about whether it is, if there's an exceedance there or whatever we detect there, whether that concentration is attributable to St. Gobain's emissions or some other potential source. And of course, there are lots of, and I've said this many times before, there are lots of homes in that area immediately outside the consent decree that are in those inferred areas of atmospheric deposition and impacts by St. Gobain. But to try to put a firm, specific number to it is a little more difficult. It's easier for us to report, here's the area around the consent decree, the inferred area, and here's how many exceedances we have. But it's not the same as us saying every one of these homes is contaminated as a result of St. Gobain's emissions.
Go ahead.
Just wondering then, how in that inferred area, what is the, how does DES then decide whether St. Gobain is responsible for any kind of remediation or anything?
And just to further answer your previous question, then I'll go to that one. I think the number that we put out there before in these inferred areas is around 650. It's probably a little higher than that now, because we've done sampling since the time that number was sort of come up with. As far as your next question, under the consent decree, unless somebody's well is contaminated above the original AGQS value of 70 parts per trillion, St. Gobain is not responsible to address those exceedances outside the consent decree area. So your question, it's not a question that we're asking ourselves. We're spending more time trying to get that data, because we can't compel St. Gobain to collect that data. And then when we get the data, we're trying to develop solutions for those folks, things like the rebate program or extension of water lines or what have you.
Do you have any other questions, Murphy?
I just want one last one about if I mean, we were looking at with 70 with the consent decree, right? Was your 70 MCLs of 70, correct?
No,
that's what the original original consent decree.
Right. So as you know, the MCL is lower now, but at the time we negotiated that consent decree, and it's a legal agreement. The way it was laid out, everything inside the consent decree outer boundary, St. Gobain had a responsibility for evaluation, and if there were exceedances, they had a responsibility to address those if attributed to their emissions. Outside the consent decree, we could not compel them to investigate or address exceedances unless the exceedance outside the consent decree was greater than 70 parts per trillion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Mooney, did you have a question?
Yes, very quickly. Thank you. And thank you for your report. I know it's still early. However, do you have a sense as to the initial response to the rebates that were offered in the soil bill, and how has that been?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative Mooney. Yes, I guess I would describe in a word the response to the rebate program as enthusiastic. And we are, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know we have several hundred applications already. And Amy and staff are fielding questions, many questions and inquiries every single day.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions for Mr. Wimsatt? Yes, Mr. Preventure.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, thanks for the thorough update. I was just wondering, I know there's been discussion, the EPA coming out with an MCL at some point, and I'm just trying to relate that to the future groundwater remediation plan at the St. Gobain facility. As you know, Pennachuck is drawing water out of the Merrimack River, and they switched to the Merrimack River because it had a lower PFOA content than Pennachuck Brook. But my understanding, based on, we're actually sampling monthly the water that we're receiving from Pennachuck, is it's kind of in the high single digits. There's been some discussion of that EPA MCL being in the low single digits. So that has an impact. The level of PFOA in the river has an impact on what happens with Pennachuck water, obviously. And I was just wondering, you had mentioned about there's a remediation plan that's going to be submitted within 120 days after the stormwater sampling. Is that correct?
That's right.
And right, good. So I was just wondering if the selection and the limitations on what would be required as far as the amount of any kind of groundwater treatment, would that include the future considerations of the lower, potentially lower MCL by EPA? In other words, you know, if now the Merrimack River is below the 12, but if the EPA comes up with a lower MCL in the future, you know, let's not lose sight of that, obviously, because the remediation plan that they select now may only be to address PFOA in the effluent that passes whatever the treatment system they're going to put in. They might be still looking at the 12, but we might be required to lower that because that might not be low enough for systems like Pennachuck. And as you're aware, there are probably a dozen or half a dozen systems further down the Merrimack into Massachusetts too that rely on the Merrimack for drinking water. So, and I just wanted to make one other comment. I was aware, I have to look back at the article, but I remember reading something a couple of months ago. There was like a mile-long barrier, curtain barrier placed. I believe it was related to contamination remediation of one of the manufacturers down in one of the Carolinas or something. And that really caught my attention because a mile-long barrier is a significant undertaking. But obviously, you know, I just, if you're not aware of that, I just wanted to relay that to you, and I can try to find that article, but it's not kind of outrageous to propose something like that because it's actually being done in South Carolina or wherever, I forget which Carolina it was, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. So that's all I wanted to get that idea across.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah, in regard to your first question or comment, yeah, we're very aware and watching very closely what EPA is going to do about the new MCL. Everyone, I think, here knows that we expect them to propose an MCL by the end of this year, which is, you know, suddenly only 4 months away, right? Or less than 4 months away. And the proposal we will get from St. Gobain for a remedial action plan will be a plan to address what is a very contaminated site, obviously. And so anytime we're looking at a remedial action plan for a contaminated site, the ultimate goal is to ensure that you to the extent practicable, you come up with a plan and implement a plan that will restore groundwater at the site to meet ambient groundwater quality standards. And of course, our ambient groundwater quality standard and the MCL tend to be one and the same. That's the way we implement our program. So we'll be very aware, you know, this remedial action plan is not going to come in until after the first of the year. We'll be aware of what EPA has proposed. It may take some time before they finalize that, but we would obviously be looking for that remedy to, you know, achieve that goal. You know, it may not be practicable that groundwater at the site will meet that everywhere at the site in anywhere in the near future, given the level of contamination. But certainly any active treatment systems that then treat groundwater and discharge it would be required. The discharge that groundwater would absolutely be required to meet any applicable standards. And even if we were to approve treatment system and based on a particular current standard, if that standard changes in the future, the responsible party would be responsible to meet that new standard as well.
You just answered my next question. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Allen?
So the EPA, as you know, is also in process of declaring at least PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under CERCLA. So how does that play into this? Because the ask from this community, to me, the expectation would be, I know not so simple, that it would be declared, a Superfund site, and the feds could go after them for cleanup dollars, and that could take some financial burden off of New Hampshire. And I think, we know Hoosick Falls has been a CERCLA site, and it isn't just for cleanup benefits that they're getting, and that's because their state is a bigger state than New Hampshire, so they were able to declare hazardous substances several years ago without waiting for the feds. That's unusual. I think that's the only state that's done that. I don't think it would be realistic for New Hampshire to take that on. But what they did get is not just the cleanup support, but they also have things that go with that, which is the federal support to the community in terms of health and health support and databases and registries and regular meetings and all kinds of stuff, that's there for health studies and things that go with that. So there's a real benefit. So what are your thoughts on the hazardous substance designation? I know because you're negotiating with them all the time, but they're experts they're one step ahead, clearly, as we all know, in those consent decrees. They were miles and years ahead of all of us. So they know just what they're doing. In these other areas like the fish testing and the stormwater testing, delay, excuse, delay, excuse. So they need, something stronger than what we're doing. And I think the CERCLA and putting that as a Superfund site, to me, might be the clout that we need. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So in general, the agency has been supportive of, listing these compounds as CERCLA hazardous substances, setting apart, even just apart from this site in a general sense. And the most immediate impact that has is for sites that are already on the national priority list in New Hampshire, of which there are 21. What that does is it strengthens the federal agencies, US EPA's and DES's standing and posture when they're dealing with the responsible party at one of these NPL sites. That has a significant immediate meaning for Pease in particular, where while the Air Force has done a lot of work, some of it was required to be done under the Safe Drinking Water Act because the agency, US EPA, didn't feel they had authority under CERCLA to order it. And so now that it'll be clear if these listings go through as proposed, it'll be clear that those authorities in the Superfund program exist and make it easier to work to ensure that responsible parties do what they're required to do with regard to these PFAS contamination issues. In the broader context of other sites, it remains to be seen. So in a general sense, and I've fielded questions on this over the last few weeks, having these compounds as CERCLA hazardous substances, at the very least, helps to just raise the concern and the posture and the authorities. And we address, to be clear, we have 21 NPL sites. We have hundreds of hazardous waste sites in the state. So the lion's share of the sites that we have are managed under our state law authority. And in a general sense, that is almost always better as long as we have a responsible party that is cooperative or that we can compel under the law. And the the magnitude of the site is something that can be handled. The state law program typically works much more quickly. It gets people remedies and solutions much more quickly than the Superfund NPL program. So the NPL program and CERCLA Superfund sites come with plenty of authorities, cost recovery abilities, very strong requirements that can be imposed on a responsible party. But they almost never happen quickly. They often take many, many years, to the frustration of residents and folks in those communities that want a solution. So it's a mixed bag whether, putting a site on the NPL ends up being a net positive or negative, and it depends on the site. I'm not going to say, at this time, we don't necessarily have, the CERCLA listing hasn't even happened yet, but we don't necessarily have any plans to propose the site for the NPL. That is, first of all, not at all a unilateral decision that DES would make. That's a decision that gets made by the communities. By, typically it includes to get a site listed on the NPL takes usually at least a couple of years. And when it does happen, it's usually a request from the community directly to the agency and to the governor. It requires a governor's letter to the US EPA to request listing, and then there's a detailed and sort of process-oriented listing process. So there's a lot that goes into that. And you know, most of the sites that we have in New Hampshire are legacy sites that have been around. You know, they were brought into the Superfund program in the early 80s, shortly after the law was passed. So it's a mixed bag, you know, whether that's a net positive or negative. It's definitely a positive when you don't have a responsible party or one that is uncooperative, because it means you can bring the resources of the federal program to bear on that site. So that's very important. When you have a party that's being cooperative and doing the work that it's required to do, it's very site specific. You know, it's not always clear which is the better pathway. So I think it remains to be seen what will happen there.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Wimsatt? I have a couple quick ones. Mr. Wimsatt, when you were talking about the installation for the POET systems beginning in October and going through September, are those being prioritized by what the sample results were? I mean, how are we deciding who gets it first? Because we're really talking, you know, 9 months to a year before people get these systems. And I hope the people that have the most contaminated well water can get them first.
My understanding is that that's really one of two criteria that are being used to try to do this as efficiently and promptly as possible. They're looking at concentration and how far above the standard homes are. So that's a primary source. But then also once they get into a neighborhood where they have those numbers, if there are 3 or 4 other houses with lower numbers, just the benefits of a contractor being on that street for the week or what have you are being considered as well. So it may be that it'll be first prioritized by, you know, where are the higher numbers, but then within that, there may be folks who have lower numbers who get one before somebody else because of the street that they live on.
Okay, no, that's good. And then my other question was, you know, there's a lot of activity going on at that Fidelity site, which abuts St. Gobain. A lot of, you know, well, there's been trees that have been removed, but there's a lot of earth movement there. And as a result of that, a lot of dust is being generated. And I was just wondering if DES is involved in that in any way, because that property's got to be as contaminated as the actual St. Gobain property. And, you know, are there any plans to work with Flatley on, you know, stormwater recovery, or something to prevent the leaching of PFAS through the soil?
Yeah, the agency has been involved in that, and particularly when construction was happening in earnest, there were a number of visits. I'll be honest with you, I'm not aware personally of any specific involvement in recent weeks. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. There are parts of the agency, you know, the parts of our water division that deal with land resources development, the alteration of terrain program and wetlands programs generally get involved in those things. I can see if we have anything currently happening, but I'm not personally aware of it.
Okay. I would just be interested if there's any issues. You know, I don't know what the final plan is going to look like, but I would expect there would be a lot of impermeable surfaces, which is actually kind of a good thing, but to prevent that percolation of water down through to the groundwater. But I would be interested if they're going to have a particular rainwater, stormwater collection system to, you know, just to, you know, maybe kind of capture or divert that drainage to an area that may not interact with any PFAS in the soil. Yep. That's just been on my radar, so I wanted to bring it up. Okay, we are at 11 o'clock. I do want to move along, and the real meat of the meeting now is, although Mr. Wimsatt's always our highlight, but I want to get reports from the Health and the Environmental Subcommittee. As I indicated at our last meeting and then in the email that I sent out earlier this week, we're looking to to see what your recommendations are out of those subcommittees for legislative remedies and non-legislative remedies to include in our November 1st report to the governor, the Senate President, and the Speaker of the House. So I don't know who wants to go first. Mr. Badazian, you want to give it a shot?
Yep. Our subcommittee met on September 1st. Covered a lot of what Mr. Wimsatt has covered. In addition, got an update on the soil study. I think we have an evolving understanding of sites that are at risk of groundwater or drinking water contamination, for which there should be study in the future and testing. The soil study is intended to find background levels in the state, and there are some, Joe and Mike correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but some levels that were higher than expected. And so, what does that correlate with? That requires some study. And then Don provided us with an update on MVD and rollout of treatment there. And we also looked at some longer term data that he's developed on increases in PFAS levels in raw water associated with volumes that are extracted from drinking water wells. That might apply more generally across the state, as well as some seasonal impacts, which I think supports what DES has been recommending, which is repeat sampling in different seasons, especially if there's a borderline test. So we have, and then finally we reviewed a list of what our recommendations will be for legislation and further study. So I think we're pretty prepared to finalize that and get that off to you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mesmer wasn't able to make this meeting. Ms. Murphy, do you have any update or report from the health subcommittee?
I don't have actually, I just texted her to ask. I don't have the updated report. I know there was some scheduling conflicts and challenges. So I don't know. I mean, can we put it on the agenda for the next meeting? Because I don't have it.
Well, we've scheduled a meeting at a week from today at 10 o'clock in person at the LOB of the policy subcommittee, which is essentially all of the elected officials who serve on this commission. At that meeting, now there's a couple caveats. Heather Goley's been out of the office, so I have not received confirmation yet from Ann Fitzgerald, who heads the House Committee Services, to see if that has been noticed and if a room has been reserved for us. But the intent at that September 16th meeting, assuming we get these administrative issues ironed out, is to have in front of us the report from the environmental subcommittee and the health subcommittee with what those recommendations are. And the policy committee then will sort through them and determine if those are ones that we want to include in our November 1st report. So I would really, I need to have those reports by Friday. There may be a little breathing room if those administrative things haven't been handled and we have to put that meeting off to the following week. But I really do want to get them. My goal is to get all these policy recommendations done through the policy subcommittee on Friday. And then the communications subcommittee would then draft the report so that at our October meeting, the commission could make its final changes, approve the report as edited, so that we can get it into the governor's desk on November 1st. So I would like to ask, all that information to come before, to get to us so I can get it, so we can have that discussion September 16th. Any questions on that? Any issues? All right. And there may be, I have ideas I'm going to bring to the policy subcommittee for proposed legislation too. Yes, Dr. Woods.
Do you have, excuse me, do you have an anticipated time for the 16th?
10 o'clock.
There's 10?
10
Okay,
o'clock, right, at the LOB. Now, like I said, I've been waiting. I've sent Ms. Fitzgerald a message. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before when I got the out of office message from Ms. Goley. But the reason I'm asking for the in-person meeting is that there's probably going to be a lot of back and forth with members, and I'm actually going to bring my computer and actually type up the report while we're there. So, you know, just as a time saver, more efficient, because there's just going to be a lot of dialogue going back and forth about how we should present this and what type of, you know, because the thing is, this is going to go to the governor November 1st, and there'll be a filing, I mean, LSRs will be filed after that. So we want to make sure that any legislative remedies that are suggested, that we also are prepared for anyone returning to the House or Senate could be in a position to bring that legislation forward. So I'll have more, I should have more information by the end of the day. I'm actually, after this meeting, I'm going to call Ann and just make sure we can nail down that date.
I was just gonna say, I just checked the House calendar and it's not on there for the 16th. So
right. So, but I think I can get. I think if I can, I think I still can meet that notice requirement. So, you know, but I do need to check with her. And but I do have, I do see that our next regular commission meeting where we will be finalizing that report and approving it would be October 14th. And it would be, you know, through GoToMeeting. I'm sure Amy is, if Amy's not still on the call, I think Mr. Wimsat has been deputized to administer this. So we would look at it October 14th for a remote meeting at 10 a.m. That's the second Friday, which I believe that's our standard. All right. Any other, oh yes, Dr. Bush.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to let you know I will be out of the office that day, the 14th, but I can be in touch with Abby Rogers, who could likely cover.
Okay.
But I also wanted to circle back, and do you think there will be room on the agenda to invite the cancer program to share an update, or should we potentially hold off until November?
I think so. I'm going to plan on it, Dr. Bush. So if you could go ahead and reserve that time for them, because my intent would be is that once that September 16th or the policy subcommittee meets, we've got the draft. Then we're going to walk out of the room with the draft, and I would share that with the commissioners. So hopefully once they have a chance to review it before our October 14th meeting, we should be able to move that agenda item pretty quickly. I know I don't want to jinx myself, but that's sort of like my plan. So we'll see. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Wimsat.
I wanted to mention, I understand the October 14th meeting is actually already on the calendar.
Yeah, it probably is. Okay, thank you.
But I also want to let you know, I have a conflict for that, so I won't be able to attend.
Well, I would suggest that those who can attend October 14th, you're going to have the draft ahead of time, and I'm hoping you'll get it September 16th after we conclude the policy subcommittee meeting. Obviously, the communications committee will go through it, but if you see any flags, you know, things that are omitted or concerns that you have that have been included, just let me know, and I can carry that issue when we finalize the final report. And the other thing, so any other questions on this before? Okay. And I just want to mention that after months, finally got the website is updated, and I all the minutes are up, I think some of the documents are up, but if you do get a chance, please check it out. I'll send you the link. The only thing I wasn't sure of is a lot of our supporting reports that come in, like the cancer report or things like that. I'm not really sure they've gotten up there. So if you look and there's a report that we've discussed separate from the minutes, but something that was at a meeting that should be up on our website, please let me know. But I'll be going in there to put in the July minutes that we approved today, but it is updated. So, okay, Ms. Mesmer, you have gotten here just in time for us to adjourn, but if you'd like to mention anything before we go.
I don't know what exactly. I just wanted to update the commission on some letters that were sent to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office.
Oh, please do. Yeah, please do.
Okay. So my concerns were around some information that was produced in civil actions in New Hampshire court, but also in Vermont and New York courts that contained some information that suggested the company had not shared some historical use of pure PFOA at quite significant quantities with the agencies and the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. So those series of 5 letters were sent. Some of the people on this commission were parties to those letters, were sent to provide that information to the Attorney General's office. They may not have had time to look at the legal filings. It's all public documents that were found that, perhaps would be helpful to both the agency and the Attorney General's office. In addition, a letter was sent on behalf by myself and Honorable Nancy Murphy this past week to TSCA, to EPA Region 1, and the U.S. Attorney General's office regarding some with respect to that and the fact that they had asserted earlier on that they had not used pure PFOA at any facility in the United States. So, they had made a statement through their lawyers in 2014 to that effect to the TSCA confidential business unit. So haven't heard anything back yet from any of those agencies except for the Attorney General confirming that they received those documents from us in New Hampshire. So I just wanted to keep you all in the loop about some of those things that are going on behind the scenes. So, and I can share all those documents with the commission.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Mesmer? No, okay. With that, I will entertain a motion to, oh yes, Ms. Allen?
I just want to note that the communications subcommittee met over the year. We do have our report prepared in draft form that we're just going to give it one look over, and then I guess I can just send that to you. Would that be?
And I'm sorry, Ms. Allen, for not
Okay.
letting that
Yeah. I mean, we all agree, in our committee, we have citizen representatives and a town representative from Merrimack, and Amy Russo is a ex officio member, and we've done some good work delving into this. And the overview is, there's still this gap between the citizen experience, the citizen needs, and the information, pulling it all together. So we do have a report prepared, and I will send that to you so that can be incorporated into everything that you have to do. My goodness. And thank you, Rosemary. I just want to take a moment to say you've done, a really amazing job sharing this and keeping us on task and pulling in exactly what needs to be pulled in. So thank you very much for your excellent.
Well, thank you. And, kind of getting sort of along those lines, I just want to kind of share with you just some ideas that have been in my head. We all know there's an election November 8th. We don't know who's going to return to the House and the Senate. I know last time we had a change in leadership of this commission. It was just, I want to have a real smooth transition. So my hope is that perhaps at the November meeting, I have to look at the calendar, or maybe even October, we could think about having an interim chair that can just be the transition until we have the reappointments of the legislative representatives of the commission. But just give that some thought. I think it would be good to having someone that can maintain some continuity of the commission. Perhaps a town rep or a citizen rep can take the reins until we get through that election transition period. But that's just something that's been marinating. Okay, so I'm going to put together the stuff from Dr. Bush, the stuff from the Communications Committee, anything I get from Environmental Subcommittee and Health Subcommittee, so that we've got some kind of working draft for the Policy Subcommittee to work with to define those recommendations for the report. If anybody else wants to attend that meeting, once I get it confirmed, you're more than welcome to. I mean, they're public meetings, but if you do want to participate, please do, and I'll let you know. So I'm not seeing any other hands up. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Ms. Allen, seconded by Mr. Dunn. All those in favor of adjourning this commission meeting, please raise your hand. Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Beth.